The only way you'll see it lighting up the sky is if it happens to re-enter while this sort of gray circle is over you. So you have these two views here on the left and on the right, and those are basically indications on the left of how far away you can actually see the object if you're on the ground. So if you're on the outer edge of this, the stage or this core section of the Long March 5B booster would be, right at the horizon. If you were right underneath the ground track, it would be straight up, and if you were somewhere in the middle, it would be somewhere 45 degrees up or so. So if you happen to be in this area, so if you happen to be in Peru right now, or Ecuador, or Colombia, or Venezuela, or the far, far western area of Brazil, probably too much rainforest there, but if you happen to be in any of those areas and you look up and it happened to re-enter, you would see it if you were in this sort of circular zone. So hopefully that answers that question. Kevin, thank you for the donation, asking political tensions from this, you think? Yeah, there's already heightened political tensions between the U.S. and China, and other countries in China, for that matter. It's obviously not a great thing. When people are worried about hazards like this, there could be some political tensions within. There could be some pressure to kind of deorbit these stages in the future. Hopefully they'll get these stages deorbited in the future, and there won't be anybody worrying about this sort of stuff. So it's a good question. Kaylee Partain, thank you for the donation as well, and the super chat, asking how come the altitude keeps rising and falling. And the answer for that is that this object is in orbit, so it orbits the Earth every roughly 90 minutes, and there is always a high point and a low point of the orbit. So something called the apoapsis and the periapsis, or the apogee and the perigee. And the apogee is the high point of the orbit, the perigee is the low point of the orbit. And so the answer is, when it's on the high part of the orbit, the altitude drops as it drops to the low part of the orbit, and then when it's in the low part of the orbit, it rises as it increases to the high part of the orbit. So every 90 minutes, you go through these cycles. And so at any given time, you'll see, even in a perfectly healthy satellite that's orbiting the Earth, you'll see these rising and falling motions that occur over and over and over again. And so it's a totally normal part of being in orbit. Nothing too surprising there. Kristen Lopez says, thanks for all the info. How long does it take to orbit, and what is the formula for the estimated time of reentry? Oh, great question. So it takes roughly 90 minutes to go around the Earth. The formula for estimated time of reentry is complicated. So there are orbits that are calculated from the radar data that the Air Force Space Surveillance Network uses to keep track of all these objects in space. And it's tricky to determine the exact time that it's going to come down in, because there's variability in several factors. Number one, this object is tumbling, and it's actually tumbling at a rate of around 12 revolutions every minute. So it's a pretty aggressive tumble. And as it's tumbling, the cross-sectional area that's exposed to the thin outer atmosphere is constantly changing. So it's very difficult to actually get an accurate estimate for when this thing is going to re-enter. And that's why you'll see our clock continuing to change up and down, as we've been monitoring this thing throughout the day. The second factor is that the density of the atmosphere at a given altitude changes based on whether it's day or night, based on what the space weather environment is occurring. So as you have more solar wind particles that hit the atmosphere, they actually cause heating, and that heating causes expansion at the outer levels of the atmosphere. So the density that this object is actually going through as it's in orbit varies. And so it gets extremely complicated. It's actually not so much a single equation that's used as is a series of equations in a computer simulation to try to determine these estimates. And so there are companies that have software that tries to figure this stuff out. And as we get the radar data, it goes to those companies, and those companies spit out an answer for when they think is the most likely time for reentry, and that's what we display here. So Sway C, thank you for the $5. It says, from the moving diagram on the left, it's passing under the U.S. Or how do we read the diagram? Yes, so diagram is pretty simple. So the red track is showing the area over the Earth that the core stage is currently flying over. And the gray circle represents an area for if you were under this, whether you'd be able to see it or not, if it was reentering, or if it was being lit up by the sun quite right. So right now, if you're in Colombia or Venezuela, and you looked up in the sky and you looked almost dead overhead, you could see this thing passing over you. And if it's a normal satellite, you would just see it as a moving star if it's bright enough, and if the sun is reflecting off of it. If it's too dark, you may not see it, but that's what you're looking at. So as of right now, it is passing over kind of the northern portion of South America, and it's just about to kind of clear the coastline and go over the Atlantic Ocean again. So that's how you read the diagram. But anywhere along this red area, along or adjacent, fairly close to it, is where you could actually see if this thing re-entered. You could see the fireball, or where you could potentially have pieces that come down. So yeah, this is fun, answering a bunch of questions. I'll continue to go through questions here. As always, if you want your question kind of bumped to the front of the list, feel free to send out a super chat. Help support us and keep us talking. But in the meantime, I'll answer some more questions from the chat. So the question was this supposed to be a controlled return to Earth, or was it supposed to remain in space? The answer is we don't really know, actually. In the live webcast, they had some translators that mentioned something about kind of a deorbit burn, but it's not clear whether that was an error in translation or whether the Chinese were trying to deorbit this and then had a technical problem. But for whatever reason, it wasn't done, and then now this is an uncontrolled reentry. Somebody asking me, happy feet, why don't you read the lower super chats as well? I mean, I've donated €3 already. You didn't read them. I'll apologize for that. I'll have to go down and see why they're not showing up for me. Also, thanks for covering the reentry. Well, you're very welcome. Let me see if I can find the lower super chat that you did earlier. But yeah, do the best to read as many of them as we can. Sometimes, though, get a few at once, and sometimes don't always see all of them. And it may have been that occurred before I got on, or let's see here. Well, I don't see it quite yet, but I'll try to see if I can get one of my associates here to send me what that super chat was. Somebody asking, is it aliens? No, not aliens. Definitely is. It's a man-made event. Basically, we have some trash that wasn't properly disposed of. It's an upper stage, or really the core stage of a rocket that wasn't disposed of. For the Long March 5B, there actually was not an upper stage. So there was a core stage and a bunch of strap-on boosters. And the core stage actually took this space station all the way to orbit on its own. So let's see here. So we did get an update a little while ago. Latest tip for CZ-5B, which is the Long March 5B booster, shows projected reentry of 2021-05-09 at 0211 UTC, plus or minus 1 hour, which is somewhere in the Mediterranean basin, is the center of that projection. Yeah, so we're starting to get some convergence here on where it might re-enter. And as of right now, kind of looking at Mediterranean basin, if it happens to land there. But of course, with a plus or minus time of 1 hour still, there's still uncertainty in that measurement. So, and then Associate also telling me that he's looking into that super chat. So we're going to try to figure out what that question was and read it off for you. But thanks for letting me know about that. So continuing, is somebody asking, is the rocket engine off? Yes, the rocket engine is off. This was the core stage that lifted off the space station for the Chinese, sometime back, and it was a hydrogen and oxygen engine. It fired, took the space station to space, and then shut off, and for whatever reason was not able to be deorbited. It either wasn't attempted to be deorbited, or maybe there was a technical issue where they weren't able to deorbit it. So now it's just on this come down wherever it wants sort of situation. So we're following it closely to see where it's going to come down. So what happens if someone is on a plane? Well, odds are you look out the window and you see some fireballs in the distance. Obviously, you wouldn't want to get the plane to get hit by any of those pieces, but the odds of that are very, very low, and you have to assume that local airspace authorities are taking precautions in some of these areas. Somebody asking, what are my qualifications? So I'm an engineer. I actually work on large vertical takeoff and landing drone technology during the day. Involved in a startup called Aerial Vehicle Automation, where we're working on building drones that make 1,500 pounds of thrust. So that's kind of my day job. But I also do, for the past 10 years, have been covering space and rocketry. Have been going out to rocket launches out at Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and also covering the Starship launches more recently here in South Texas. So I live in San Antonio. The actual Boca Chica, Texas is about 4.5 hours drive south of me. So I go out there and meet with several others, and we take photos and videos of the launches and help to try to document some of that history. So yeah, I'm a kind of space engineering and technology expert, if you will. KC526, thanks for the donation, asking what are the red dots, and can you tell my daughter Kathy to not be scared, please and thank you. Well, Kathy, there's really nothing to worry about. This odds are this thing will splash down in the ocean harmlessly, and even if it does hit land, very, very low odds of it actually hurting somebody. So nothing to worry about. This is a very, very low risk type of situation. So it's all good. It's all good. Godless Blessings, thank you for the $5, asking why doesn't the altitude on the video decrease? And so as an object goes through orbit, it has a high point and a low point in its orbit, an apoapsis or a periapsis. The apoapsis is the high point of the orbit, periapsis is the low point of the orbit. And so you'll see a periodic fluctuation where as the object is at the low point of the orbit and it moves towards the high point of the orbit, the altitude will actually increase. And then when it's at the high point of the orbit and it goes back down towards the low point of the orbit, it will actually decrease again. So as you're watching this, every 90 minutes or so, you're going to see these increases and these decreases in altitude. And until this thing actually re-enters, it's going to go up, it's going to go down, it's going to go up, it's going to go down. So you're going to see this sort of cyclical motion as this thing goes up and down throughout the orbits. And the red dots. So the red dots basically represent ground-to-air observation sites. So it's basically people on the ground that are keeping an eye out for this thing, or maybe they're even on boats in some cases, but they're just people that are observing this situation. Jexpo AJ, thank you very much. Chat says hi, bestie. So Jexpo's bestie, hello. So just continuing to look through the chat here, answer any questions that we can see. Somebody asked, can you make the text font larger? I'm not sure if that can be done or not, but I'll kind of toss that out there. It may be tricky to do. Somebody asked if people were to actually get hit, what would be the consequences? So there are international treaties between spacefaring nations that basically prescribe what to do in those sorts of situations for, as far as, consequences if those types of things occur, or compensation. So it would be an international incident between whatever country citizen gets injured and China, who put this thing up in the air. So that's how it would ultimately be handled. It would be a diplomatic situation. And I do know in the past there have been incidents where there was damage and compensation was paid by one country to another. That actually has been exercised in the past. Low chance, but it occurs. Kayla Cheyenne, thank you very much. Jay, thank you for the super chat, $4.99. Appreciate it. Somebody asking, is California safe? So as of now, the North American passes are going to be kind of early in the morning. It's looking, though, however, that this thing will not stay in orbit long enough for that to be a problem. Although it can always change. There's a lot of uncertainty still in this data, and in the exact timing of this thing comes down because of the fact that it's spinning and the Earth's atmosphere contracting and expanding. So it's a complicated situation. Swayze asking, it turned around? Question mark. Wasn't it head the other way? And the answer is no. It's in an orbit. And so it's constantly going through different parts. It's always in the same direction, or it's roughly, moving from the west to the east, depending on, as this thing is spinning, it's basically orbiting the Earth. It's in an orbit. It's almost like a hula hoop sort of shape. but the Earth is actually spinning underneath it as it's orbiting. So what you'll see is every 90 minutes it'll orbit the Earth, but it'll kind of have a slightly different ground track each time. And that's because the Earth is rotating underneath this object that's spinning around in space. So just a quick update. The stage is currently, passing over the North Atlantic Ocean right now, on the way to Europe. It's about to go over Portugal and Spain here in the next several minutes. And it actually will go back over Italy again, across the boot of Italy, if you will. So anybody who's in those areas can kind of keep an eye out. It is nighttime right now, so if you go outside and you happen to see fireballs, please do let us know. Kayla Sheehan asking chances of there being nuclear contents on it. Luckily, there are no nuclear contents on it. It is a lower stage of the Long March 5B rocket that is powered by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen held at cryogenic temperatures. So there are no nuclear components on it. So thank you very much for that chat. Pavan Kumar, thank you for the chat. When will it land and where? We still don't quite know. The latest best estimate was somewhere over actually the Mediterranean Sea was the estimate. However, that is not going to occur on this orbit, most likely, but that was the best estimate as of right now, in about an hour and a half, a little over an hour and a half from now, is the projected reentry time. Subject to change as these radars continue to get more and more data, and we get new data almost constantly to update this. So we'll keep the reentry time updated. Is the rocket visible from the ISS? Sometimes it may be. Godless Blessings, thanks for the $5. Says, thanks for having this live. Can it be shot down if it gets too close to a habitable area? So in theory, yes. However, in practicality, no. So there are a number of, they're called anti-satellite missiles that are often carried by naval ships of several countries, including the United States. China has some, I believe India has some. Other countries likely have some as well. The problem is if you shoot it down before it's actually re-entering the atmosphere, some of the pieces, when it explodes, will actually get boosted to higher orbits, where they can pose a threat to astronauts at the space station, astronauts on the Soyuz, or on Crew Dragon, or anywhere else. So it's important that we don't actually shoot it down while it's still in space, otherwise you can get this sort of shower of debris. And very small pieces of debris can have really a huge impact on a spacecraft, and can be, a real hazard. It could be cause injuries or death on the spacecraft. So it's important that we don't shoot it down. Better off to just try to see where, hopefully lands in the ocean or something. Is NORAD monitoring? Absolutely. That is, the U.S. military keeps track of tens of thousands of objects. They're constantly looking out for, for various rocket launches, nuclear missile launches, and also just space debris. So you better believe that they're keeping an eye on this. Kaden Morris, thank you for the $9.99. Really appreciate that. That's super helpful. So just kind of browsing through chat here as this gets ready to go over Portugal. The red ground track indicates the area that the rocket is going to pass directly overhead, or the rocket stage is going to pass overhead. But as always, I can't emphasize enough, very low chance of any kind of accidents or injury from this. The most likely outcome is it ends up in the ocean. And if it does end up on land, it's still the most likely outcome is that it just ends up in a field somewhere. So no big deal. Jay Elizabeth, thank you for the chat. Super chat asks, what if there's a nuclear payload on the rocket? Well, luckily, there is no nuclear payload on the rocket. It is simply a first stage that was used to lift the Chinese space station into orbit. It is called the core stage. It was a liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen fueled stage. No nuclear power on board it. So that's the good news. Pasa Roy Zola, thank you for the super chat. Asks, when will it be able to be seen from mainland Portugal? The answer is potentially now. If it was re-entering now, you would be able to see it. You would be able to see fireballs or some glowing taking place. Right now, it is in the shadow side of the Earth, so it's nighttime on the ground there in Portugal. the sun is not actually illuminating the rocket stage, so it would be very difficult to see just as a satellite going overhead. So the only way you would see it now is if you went outside and it was actually re-entering a little early, you would actually see a bunch of fireballs going overhead. But at this point, based on the radar estimates that we've seen, we don't think that's happening yet, but obviously if it does happen, please let us know. So I'm getting a question, where was the recent footage taken? And so let me actually try to find out for you. I'll send a message. Okay, it looks like that was from Washington, where that footage was taken. And Happy Feet, you'd messaged us about not seeing a question. Looks like you originally donated €1, but it looks like there was no message attached to it. So I probably mentioned your name, but didn't actually get to your question. So sorry about that. It looks like, yeah, it was last seen in the early morning hours at Washington. So it's definitely some time back from when this thing was last actually filmed. And so really before this thing re-enters, you really only see it during specific times, maybe an hour or so, after sunset, or an hour before sunrise. And that's when you have a situation where you have the actual body of this rocket, it's being illuminated by the sun, but it's still night on the ground. So you get this good contrast where it looks like a star that's sort of moving across the night sky. And so that's sort of the best time to actually see this thing. Short of it re-entering. And if it's re-entering, you'll see it whenever it re-enters, probably day or night. So once again, Kaden, thank you for the super chat. Pat, thank you for the $5. Says, I am not familiar with the altitudes of the Starlink's orbit. Is there a chance that it may take out any of those satellites out? No, so the good news is that the Starlinks from SpaceX are at higher altitudes. Otherwise, they would be kind of on the verge of reentry as well. So the good news is this core stage of the Long March 5B rocket does not pose any risk to the Starlink satellites that are in orbit. So that's good news. And you want to actually, and that's very important too. It's like, you don't want to have satellites crashing into each other, because then they end up making more pieces, and those pieces can lead to more collisions, and you can end up having this sort of runaway effect. So the good news is that this is not a hazard to any other satellites. It's in a very low orbit, imminently re-entering, in the next hour and a half or so, and it is not a threat to anybody else or to any other satellites. So people saying just joined. When is this expected to hit? The best estimate is within about an hour and a half or so. That's the best estimate, but there's always a certain amount of uncertainty, plus or minus an hour. So it could come in as soon as 30 minutes from now. It could actually come down, 2.5 hours from now. We don't know. There's uncertainty because this whole thing is tumbling through the air. So Cummins Power, thank you for the $10 chat. Approximately how many miles up is when the rocket when the stage separates? So I don't know. I don't actually know the exact trajectory that the Long March 5 rockets separate at. But generally, it's somewhere above 50 miles in altitude where you do see separation events occur. And so somewhere kind of 50 miles up or higher is typically where they occur at, where they're out of the bulk of the Earth's atmosphere. And for this rocket, it took it all the way up to orbit as well. So it likely took it up, even higher than that. But I don't know, don't have that knowledge off the top of my head. Somebody asking what happens when it lands. Does somebody go get it? I think there's no formal plan necessarily to have somebody go get it, but if it lands on land, you can bet people are going to go out and probably try to grab pieces. That's sort of human nature, right? And who knows, some of these pieces may end up in museums someday. 8EL Guy 1, thank you for the chat, the $4.99. Really appreciate that, Nelson. Says, just want to say thank you for hosting. Well, my pleasure. Happy to be here talking about this. Interesting space history going on here. People asking, will it pass by Texas? I do believe there were supposed to be some passes that would occur, kind of 4 or 5 in the morning time frame. Forget the exact time, but It does appear that it is most likely going to re-enter ahead of that, so I don't think we're going to have a chance to see it go over Texas again. Of course, if the estimate ends up being wrong, and it ends up staying in orbit longer, and it does make it till 5 in the morning, then we would actually see it in Texas. And it's an estimate. You have all these variables that are occurring. How the density of the outer atmosphere, which changes with weather conditions, day and night, and the fact that this thing is tumbling, also adds a great degree of uncertainty. So where is it landing? Yeah, so we still don't know. There's still, we know the ground track of this thing, right? So you can actually look out several orbits and see all the areas it could potentially come down over. But what you don't know is, because it's orbiting the entire Earth over a 90-minute period, because the uncertainty is around an hour plus or minus, so it's really over 2 hours of uncertainty. You really could see it land almost anywhere on Earth, as long as it's somewhere along that ground track. So, the last estimate I was looking at was showing, somewhere kind of in the Mediterranean Sea. But if it ends up a few minutes earlier than that, it could be Europe. If it ends up a few minutes later than that, it could be somewhere in Africa. It just really depends. It depends on where it is in the orbit. And somebody's saying, the rocket is currently estimated to be in the Indian Ocean, and it's always possible. Again, if it goes later, if it goes earlier, orbiting the entire Earth is literally the degree of uncertainty. So there's quite a bit of uncertainty. The only thing that will be certain is it will be somewhere near or adjacent to that red ground track. Michael May, thank you for the donation, asking if this was an asteroid instead of a rocket, would we still have as little of an idea of where it's going to land? So actually, with an asteroid, you typically have more certainty. And the reason is it's traveling from deep space, and it tends to come in a little bit more of a known entry angle. So in other words, it's not orbiting the Earth over and over and over again like this is. It actually tends to be coming in from deep space. So typically, if you do have the orbital elements that are accurate for a rocket, it actually will come down at a more known position typically. And there is an exception to that. In certain cases, if the asteroid is coming in very, very shallow angle to the Earth's atmosphere, sometimes there can be some uncertainty of where it actually lands. And sometimes asteroids have been known to even skim off the atmosphere. So if they happen to hit just a very shallow angle, they can actually partially re-enter the atmosphere, turn into a fireball, and then actually have enough velocity still to actually re-enter space and actually leave the Earth behind again. So that does actually occur, and there have been some known videos where that has happened. PLB, thank you very much for the $20 donation. Really appreciate that. Asking, are Canadians are safe? So as of right now, the best estimate we have is that it wouldn't pass over North America until kind of early in the morning. So as a result, it's looking like re-entry is going to be before that. So it does seem that North America is a little bit safer right now, unless this thing happens to stay in space, many hours longer than anticipated. So as of right now, Canada is looking pretty good at not actually, or at being safe, I should say. So no worries there. And of course, keep in mind, even all this stuff said, still very high chance this thing just enters into the ocean, and doesn't pose a threat to the ground. So as you can see from the image here, it's currently passing over Turkey. So if you're in Turkey, look up and let us know if there's any fireballs. It would be entering in earlier than anticipated, but you never know. Gift Maremma, thank you very much for the $4.99 and the mic drop emote. Very cool. Somebody else asking, is Tennessee safe? As of right now, kind of like I said before, North America is looking fairly safe at this point. It would have to stay in orbit quite a few hours longer than anticipated to make it back to North America. So right now, passing over Turkey. Next up will be Iraq, northern Iraq, and then Iran, and then followed by Pakistan. Those are sort of the next land zones on the ground track. So as of right now, no indication that it's going to re-enter that soon, but it's always possible. So if you happen to live in any of those areas and you happen to be outside, you can take a look up and tell us if you see anything. Again, very low risk to anybody on the ground. Even if it were to come down, it is not going to be like a bomb when it hits or anything. It's just going to be pieces of metal coming down. So, but very low risk, nothing to be too terribly concerned about, but would most likely be a spectacular light show if you happen to be underneath it when it's actually re-entering. So we'll continue to monitor the situation very carefully. Appreciate all the comments and the questions that come in. Continuing to kind of go through the chat and answer questions as they pop up. Of course, if you want your questions answered sooner, feel free to jump in on the super chat and we'll get you there right away. Somebody said they saw it an hour ago, passing over them. Very cool. Luxy Queen, thank you for the donation. Says, doesn't that mean that it's going to hit somewhere in Europe 90 minutes from now? So it's possible. I think one of the updates we saw was saying somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea. Can't rule that out right now. So thank you for the chats that are coming in here. Really appreciate it. Somebody says, how is it lit up in the recent footage if it's dark out? So the way you see this thing is either if it's re-entering, you'll see it kind of day or night as sort of fireballs in the sky. But if it's not re-entering yet, you can see it if you happen to have a nighttime sky, and if you happen to have sunlight that's illuminating it, then you'll actually see it in the sky. And it'll look just like any other satellite, kind of bright satellite that's kind of gliding over you. So you can sometimes see it if it's dark out because the sunlight is actually reflecting off of it. Annie Cloud, thank you very much for the donation. That's awesome. She says, hi, thanks for the info. How long for the debris to hit either water or land after re-entry? So this varies a bit based on how heavy, how much mass each piece has. But it's anywhere between 5 minutes and 20 minutes is typically what you would see for actually, objects from space, from when they're bright to when they're actually landing, hitting the ground. So from when they start to re-enter to when it's all said and done and the pieces are laying on the ground is kind of anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes is sort of the best estimate. And it varies a little bit. The heavier pieces will come down sooner. The lighter pieces, more fluffy pieces will take longer to come down. Maddie Gaga 2013, thank you for the donation. Says, how do you think the world would respond if this were to crash into a built-up area? What would the repercussions be, and would this put strain on the Chinese relations? I genuinely love your channel. Well, thank you very much, Maddie Gaga 2013. Really appreciate that. So, yeah, I think if this were to actually cause damage, there would probably be a worldwide discussion. There would be discussions in the UN about this. There are treaties in place to compensate, for damage on the ground in another country caused by another country launching a rocket. There certainly would be a lot of discussions. It could put some stress on Chinese relations. In the long run, I hope that there's a little pressure on China just to kind of get the situation under control so that when they launch rockets, there aren't pieces raining down on people. I think that's just, good thing to be doing. And it may be that they were even trying to do that on this last launch, but they might have run into a technical issue. So I do think it will open up a discussion, and it's always good to have a discussion about how to make the world a better place for humans on it. So I think that's great. Z, thank you for the $5. Is the Middle East safe? Well, I think even if this thing re-enters over the Middle East, odds are very low that it actually would impact a person, right? There's a lot of empty space out all over the world. So, this is kind of currently passing over Iran right now. If it were to re-enter now, you could see pieces on the ground there. However, there's no indication that it's going to re-enter quite this early, and so worth keeping an eye on, but nothing to be worried about. Sys Media, thank you very much for the donation, the $4.99. Really appreciate it. Asks, what is the possibility of it hitting Texas? So I do remember, I live in Texas myself. I'm in San Antonio, and I had looked at, some of the estimates for the orbit, when it would pass over, when it would actually pass over, Texas. And I was looking to be around 5 in the morning. So at this point, it's looking like it will most likely re-enter before it actually reaches, that late. That many hours from now. So I'd say the possibility of it hitting Texas are very low at this point. Not zero. If the estimates end up being way off and it stays in orbit, longer, for many hours, then it could end up reaching Texas. But I think as of right now, it doesn't seem like Texas is a high risk zone. So good news there if you're in Texas. Abigail asking how high altitude are satellites usually compared to this rocket? So it's a great question. Most are several times higher in altitude, and the reason is the higher in altitude you are, the less atmospheric drag there is, and the less fuel you have to spend to basically stay up there. So satellites will orbit the Earth, and periodically there is always some drag from the Earth's atmosphere, even at really high altitudes, and it gradually will slow the satellite down and lower the orbit. So satellites will carry usually propellants, or usually hypergolic propellants, that you'll mix a fuel and an oxidizer together in a thrust chamber. They'll explode and they'll create a thrust, and that is usually used to send the satellite to a higher orbit. So typically, satellites are usually at least 3 times this height. Typically some are lower, but then they have to spend more fuel, and then some are way higher. There are satellites all the way out and are called geosynchronous orbits, which are some fraction of the distance between the moon and the Earth. And they're way up there, but satellites are usually much higher than this. This is a rocket body at the end of its lifetime. Its demise is imminent. Tom Bicey, thank you very much for the $20. That's super helpful. It says thanks for being you. Thanks for the support and for helping us cover events like these live, whether it's rocket launches or these reentries or any other events in space and aviation. We're happy to be here to help cover that. So somebody asking, is it possible for it to break up in multiple pieces? And the answer is, not only is it possible, it's the most likely outcome. As this thing hits the atmosphere, the aerodynamic forces and the heat will shred the body into many different pieces. And the parts that actually survive and make it to the ground will be the heavier, more heat-shielded pieces, such as, the engines and other parts that have kind of more mass. Morris Pearson, thank you for the chat, asking hydrazine, is there any left in that rocket? The answer is I actually don't know. This is this core stage of the rocket is primarily fueled by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, so most of that will have boiled off. I don't know whether it had a reaction control system or any thrusters that used hydrazine or nitrogen tetroxide. I'm not sure. Would be curious to find that out though. So, Gaston Correa, thank you very much for the donation as well. So Zaguanten, Los Perros, Cimarrones, Papa. Sherry R, thank you very much for the donation, $4.99. Do you still think the Mediterranean basin will happen? It seems beyond that now. So that was an estimate for some time ahead of, hour and a half or so ahead of when that came in. So likely there will be a new update coming out here fairly soon, and we will keep an eye on that and let you know what those new updates are. So I want to just give a quick update on the footage that you're seeing in the screen. This latest footage just came in was actually captured in Algeria. And you can see here, you can actually see it's kind of neat footage. You can see it periodically flashing. And as I mentioned before, this thing was rotating at a known rate based on radar of about 12 rotations per minute. So that periodic flashing, getting bright and dim, bright and dim, bright and dim, is due to that stage that's literally tumbling end over end, almost like you threw something across the room, and it's kind of tumbling end over end as it goes by there. But you can see it's pretty bright there, and that's cool footage that just came out of Algeria. Very cool. So yeah, people have their eyes up for this thing. If you happen to be in the ground track of this thing, go outside, look up, and try to get some footage. So thanks for the super chats continuing to come in here. I'm just taking a look at them. Wouldn't weight not matter for speed of reentry according to acceleration due to gravity? So yes, the acceleration due to gravity is constant for all objects. However, because we live in a dense atmosphere, the drag depends on the cross-sectional area and the aerodynamic characteristics of the object, something called ballistic coefficient, and it's mass to aerodynamic drag ratio. So the speed of reentry does vary based on the different ballistic coefficients for each piece. Anthony Quintile, thank you very much for the $4.99. Really appreciate it. You guys help us keep us doing this. Hopefully I say your name correctly. Via Scaladas Alikas Club, thank you very much for the donation. That's super awesome. We're happy to cover this for you all. Very exciting. And Skylar Aguirre, thank you for the donation as well. It says, I'm just curious to know that if it does land in the Mediterranean Sea, would people be able to see any debris flying? And if so, how far out? So the answer is yes, potentially from southern Europe. If this thing does come down in the Mediterranean Sea, you would see a train of fireballs, somewhere in the sky. And as far as the distance, you see on this left-hand screen, you can see this rocket just passing off the coast of India. But anywhere between where the rocket ground track is and the outer edges of that circular region are areas where you could potentially see it. The closer you are to being underneath it, then obviously the better the view and the higher the sky any fireballs would be from it. But yeah, that's roughly the distance of visibility. So if you were to take that circle and kind of put it over the Mediterranean, you kind of get an idea of how far out you might be able to see it. William Daniels, thank you for the donation. Said your patience in answering the same questions over and over is great. Yeah, I don't mind. It's always fun to talk about how the world works and how science works, and yeah, it's just exciting to cover something like this. So happy to be here. Joe Strohmeyer, thank you for the donation. How does solar activity affect atmospheric drag? Yeah, great question. So as you have increases in solar activity, it actually causes heating in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And it basically it causes the outer atmosphere to expand. So you actually see an increase in drag for satellites during periods of high solar activity. And this can shorten the lives of satellites because they have to spend more of their fuel to stay in orbit. Or in our case, it can also hasten the demise of objects that are getting close to re-entering by creating more drag on them and basically bringing them down sooner. So great question there. Sherry R, thanks for the donation. Why is this not on any USA channel live? It seems quite important. Yeah, great question. Well, you're here and we're covering it live, so you're in the right spot. I think the news media has their priorities, kind of conventional media, and but there's obviously an appetite to follow this, and it's an interesting science event, so people want to know about it. Xerix, thanks for the donation. Will it be visible in the daylight? And what knocked it out of orbit? What was its mission? So it was a core stage to a Chinese Long March 5B satellite carrying their space station to orbit. Once it had deployed the space station, there was no use for it anymore. So if it does re-enter during the daylight, it probably would be bright enough to see the fireballs during the daylight even. Nothing knocked it out of orbit per se. It's just simply it was in a low orbit and it's just experiencing atmospheric drag. And because it didn't refire its engines to bring it down in a known location, atmosphere is just doing it for it, and it's going through what's called an uncontrolled re-entry. Maddie Gaga 2013, thanks again for another donation. Asked, where's Bruce Willis and Aerosmith when you need them? I just thought I'd throw another €5 your way to counter the exchange rate. LOL. Well, hey, we really appreciate that. It helps us cover these types of events. So appreciate you big time. Randy Pate, how likely is it the U.S. could shoot down the rocket down if needed? So the U.S. does have anti-satellite missiles. However, they typically aren't used because if you use them, you can actually accidentally kick some of the pieces into higher orbits where they could pose a threat to the space station or to astronauts flying around, so, or to other satellites as well. So you definitely don't want to do that. And so most likely that kind of thing won't be utilized in this situation. Gift Marima, thank you for the $4.99. Says they asking the same questions over and over. Texas. Look, it's going to land in the water anyway. Will burn off in most part. It's clear. Yeah, I think lots of people are curious, and people are hopping on and off the stream at different times as we get closer to this reentry. And so, yeah, don't mind talking about some of this stuff. Brant Porter, $5. Thank you. Did China anticipate the reentry would be uncontrolled and potentially dangerous? And what's your pizza topping? Yeah, I'm kind of a mushroom and sausage guy myself. I think those are delicious toppings. As far as did China anticipate it, it's possible they were trying to actually re-enter it in safely and maybe just had a technical problem. I mean, it's well known in rocket science that this is a hazard that is there. So obviously there was knowledge that this is a thing that can happen. And hopefully it just was a technical issue that they'll fix in the future. CH, thanks for the $4.99. Says, no question. Take a 9-second break. Sip some coffee. Have a swig of cocoa lemonade. You deserve it. Thank you for doing this. Well, hey, really appreciate it. And I actually will take you up on that offer. I will be back in about 20 seconds. I'm going to grab a drink. So I will be right back. All right, I've made it back here. Appreciate these super chats as they continue to come in. So Tom Hagen, thanks for the $5. And Canadian Republican, thank you again for another donation. And says, just want to say thank you for sharing facts and not fear. I was losing my mind before. I won't your stream. Thank you very much. Well, it's good to hear. That can kind of reassure people that, hey, it's very low risk of this landing on land, very low risk of it actually hurting anybody or landing on anybody, and an even lower risk, like 8 billion in one, that it's actually you. So that is good news. William Daniels, thank you for the $5, saying, does the atmospheric burnups symbolize Dogecoin performance? Who knows? My personal views on crypto is that as the world becomes more and more digital, there will be winners and losers in these cryptocurrencies. I think overall cryptocurrencies will probably keep going up, in the long run. Technology always wins in the long run. Now, will it be Doge that wins? Will it be some other cryptocurrency that wins? Who knows? But I do think, crypto in the future, people can see that's the way the world is moving. So that's very exciting. So yeah, people asking, where is it going to land? We're there's an estimated about an hour or so until the estimated reentry point, based on the latest radar data. We still are trying to refine where that likely would bring it down. Last update we had seen was the Mediterranean kind of area, but we will see. Right now, you can see the ground track. Really, the next land area that this core stage is going to pass over is going to be over kind of mid Australia. So if you happen to be in Australia, keep your eye out. It's daytime now, but certainly is the possibility of that if it does reenter, you might see some fireballs. So continuing here, thank you for the super chats that keep coming in. Leroy Jenkins, thank you for the $10 and the emote. Really appreciate it. Very cool. David Birch, thanks for the $5. says, just counting, you seems to be losing about a kilometer every 35 to 40 seconds. Thanks for covering it. Yeah, so it's hard to say, as we look at the telemetry, some of that altitude that's going up and down is just the natural progression between the high and the low points of the orbit. So it's going in this, this orbit that's kind of elliptical. There's always a high point and there's always a low point. And so sometimes over time, over the course of a 90-minute orbit, you'll see, an increase in altitude, then a decrease in altitude, then an increase, and then a decrease over, as different orbits occur sequentially. So it's a constantly moving thing. So it may not be simply due to the drag that's occurring. Mackenzie Scachetti, is a tsunami possible? Not likely at all with this. It's about 22 tons. However, when it hits the atmosphere, aerodynamic forces and heating will destroy and break it up. So it's very unlikely that it actually will, that it would cause a tsunami. In fact, it's pretty much impossible that it would cause a tsunami. There's no risk of that happening in any reasonable way. Kai the Wolf, thank you for $5. So are we not in communication with China, even though it's their rocket? Oh, so I'm sure we are. I'm sure different governments around the world are not thrilled this is happening. And the Chinese are aware it is too, but it's just one of those things that, maybe they tried to deorbit it intentionally and didn't have the fuel to do it, or maybe they had a technical problem. It's not clear. China does have a history of sometimes dropping these stages, kind of wherever. But hopefully, as people kind of become more aware of these types of issues, with time they'll fix they'll correct those problems in the future. Maddie Gaga, 2013, thank you once again. Said, I've just tasked my cousin in Melbourne, Australia to get his phone out to record. He also has a telescope, so fingers crossed for some star footage. Yeah, that'd be very cool if it does happen to come down a little early and he films it. That would be amazing. So good job. Yeah, anybody who knows anybody around this red ground track coming up, feel free to give them a call and tell them, hey, go outside. You may not see anything. You probably won't. But if you do, it would be really cool footage. And it could be the next, viral popular video. Angela Kraus says, thanks for the donation. For the $4.99, Angela says, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. It is wonderful. Thumbs up, clapping. Well, appreciate you, Angela. Appreciate everyone who's been able to donate and follow this very interesting science news event going on right now. It's a little bit like one of those games where you spin the globe and you put your finger down quickly to try to see where it's going to drop. And that's a little bit the way this is. There is a red ground track, which, it's only going to fall on or near the ground track. But we don't know the exact time that it comes down in, and it orbits the entire Earth in 90 minutes. So, a little bit of error can result in a lot of uncertainty as far as when it comes down. But yeah, everybody stay calm. Very, very low risk to anybody on the ground. 70% of the Earth is covered by water, roughly between 70 and 75%. And even if it does land on land, most land is empty fields, right? And so no need to be concerned or worry. You're far higher risk, tripping, going over to wash your hands in the sink, So continuing to kind of monitor the situation, looks like it is approaching the coast of Australia, the ground track. Somebody asking, thank you for the donation, everything Samsung Pro, saying, what is the red spot? It is above my place. Well, no need to worry. That red spot is simply an indicator that there's basically a ground to air observer who is out there looking to see what they can see with this thing. So no need to worry. It's not that's not X marks the spot that it's coming down. So no worries there. So I'm going to look for some more questions in the chat. Of course, if you want to kind of have your question go to the top, feel free to do a super chat. Help support us and keep this going. Somebody asking, how are you tracking this? Do you have a live tracking going on, or are you using simulation? So the answer is this: the data for this tracking comes from the Air Force's Space Surveillance Radar, And so they beam radar beams into the air off the big satellite dishes. They look for reflections, basically. And, they get information on where the object is, what its speed is, which direction it's going in, all that kind of stuff. And that then gets fed into a computer model, which basically plots the orbital elements and then plots it on the screen for us. So it is actually based on real data. Karaoke Vic says, "You're doing great with the stream. Thank you very much. Been listening while grinding piston rings in my garage, and it's like having the radio on." Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. It's always great to have words of encouragement when you're doing this sort of thing. So very cool. Thanks for the $25. Awesome. Morris Pearson, thanks for the $5. And Scarlett, 020100. Says, thanks for the $10. Great live streaming, graphics and commentary. If a large piece falls in the Mediterranean, could it cause a tsunami? The answer is no. These pieces aren't large enough to cause a tsunami. So that's good news. No risk there. If you happen to live along the Mediterranean coast, there's no concern there. And Bumblebee, thank you very much for the $20. Awesome. Helps support us and keep us going. So I've got to take a momentary break here. I will be back in about 2 minutes. Thank you very much. All right, I am back, and as you can see on the screen here, it looks like the core stage is passing over kind of middle portion of Australia right now. So I appreciate the various chats that are coming in here. So lots of questions, lots of people kind of worried. The thing to remember with this is very low chance that it actually hits anywhere on land, and even if it does, estimates are that there's less than 1% chance that it actually hits any person. And even so, the odds that it hits you is like 1 in 8 billion. So definitely be more worried about the drive down the street or crossing the street. Much higher risk of something happening from one of those things than being impacted by this piece of debris. And so just a quick recap here. This whole situation kind of arose when the Chinese launched their first space station module. They launched it on a Long March 5B rocket. It has a core stage that is a liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen core stage, and 4 strap-on boosters that are actually kerosene and liquid oxygen. It boosted the core stage of the Chinese space station to orbit, but then once it was done, for whatever reason, it was not deorbited kind of safely like they would normally try to do, and put it into the ocean. So I don't know if either the Chinese didn't have the fuel to do it, or maybe they ran into a technical issue. It's not real clear at this point. But for whatever reason, it wasn't done. So now it's kind of undergoing a kind of controlled or uncontrolled reentry. Sherry R., thank you very much for the $50. That's awesome. After Australia, where will this go? I've been with you all afternoon, and I can't believe that you're the only one covering this. What is the USA possibility now? Thank you for dedication. Well, thank you very much for the chat and the support. It means the world to us to have that kind of financial backing to help cover some of the costs of what we do. It's always pricey to do this type of thing, so really do appreciate the help. So this stage is orbiting the Earth once every 90 minutes. The odds that it actually gets to the USA are very low. When I was looking at the orbital passes earlier for North America, it looked like they were all occurring kind of after midnight type of time frame. So odds are right now, with an estimated time to reentry of around an hour, this thing will likely come down long before it makes it back to the North America again. But we'll see. We'll continue to monitor it. The red ground track shows where this thing is kind of headed next. Right now it's about to, as it continues to go over New Australia, it'll then pass over New Zealand and then out on a long cruise over the ocean. So we'll see what happens. Bumblebee, thanks for $10. Appreciate it. Matty Yaga, thanks again for another 5. You literally have more chance of being killed by a vending machine than being hit by this rocket. LOL. Also, I'm in British pounds. Oh yes, so thank you for the 5 British pounds. Awesome. And yes, that's true. You probably do have a far higher chance of getting killed by a vending machine than actually being hit by one of these rocket pieces. So nothing to fear. Definitely don't be scared. Watch it with interest because it's an interesting story, but don't be nothing to worry about. Tobin Bybee, thank you very much for the $5. Says the best footage so far. Any chance it will fly over the U.S. before reentry? It does not look like it's likely to do that. If it does, it will be after midnight, kind of in the early morning hours, between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., depending on where you're at. So it looks like, in all likelihood, this thing will re-enter far before then. Masha Sharuki, thank you again for $5. Why was there such less coverage and news on the rocket last year that China made on a mistake on? And what's the difference about that one? Thank you, guys. So basically, you're probably referring to, there was a similar type of situation that occurred last year. And I think the answer is just, news, whatever the news cycle is, whatever they're kind of worried about is the biggest concern. Perhaps it was, COVID-19, perhaps it was, kind of civil issues. For whatever reason, it was not, it was just not covered to the same degree. And who knows, people vote with their wallets, right? So sometimes they go with whatever the perceived highest level of interest is in. But so Russian Seal Gaming, thank you very much for the $4.99. So he says, are airplanes at risk because of this debris? So the short answer is, there's a lot of space that this debris is going to pass through. There's a lot of empty space in the skies, right? So if you look up right now, go outside, look straight up, odds are you're going to look at an empty sky and not an airplane. So the same thing kind of applies to this sort of situation. If I were an airspace authority near this red line, I would probably let pilots know that, hey, maybe we want to fly off a little bit to the left or to the right, right? But I think the risks are low. But of course, if you're in an airplane and you get hit by a piece of debris, it could be bad. But airplanes have a lot of redundant systems, so that if they do take some damage, it's not likely to sort of be the end of the airplane in most cases. But you definitely don't want to take a hit. So I'd say it's not zero risk, but it's very low. So thanks for that chat. So here's one. Will New York be safe? As of right now, it looks like, if this thing were to stay in orbit, it would have to stay in orbit many, many hours longer than predicted in order to actually, get back over New York. So odds are good that that New York would be fairly safe, at least as of right now, from what we can tell. Now these are estimates. These estimates can be off, but at least as of right now, everything is looking like a reentry somewhere in around an hour. And I'll mention too, there's uncertainty in these predictions. So reentry could be occurring now, or reentry could occur at an hour from now, or reentry could occur in 2 hours from now. It's not completely clear when this thing will reenter. These are estimates only for a tumbling rocket in an atmosphere that is swelling and contracting all the time. So it's hard to know exactly when. Morgan Westerman, thank you for the $5. Says, I live in Missouri. We're in a direct path depending on reentry time. Are you personally nervous on the upcoming impact? I know I am. So I'm really not. It's almost like getting hit by lightning. You have to really be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And as of right now, at least, North America is looking like, like reentry would occur before it makes it back to North America. But we'll see. We'll keep an eye on it. And, I certainly wouldn't be nervous about it. I wouldn't lose any sleep about it. I wouldn't stress over it. These things happen. It's an interesting story. We'll keep an eye on it, but it seems unlikely to be a huge threat. So, continuing to look through some of these questions here. So as of this point, we do not know when reentry is exactly going to occur. We think that it could be, based on the estimates from the orbital elements, that within about an hour. But there's still a kind of a plus or minus 1 hour on uncertainty. So hopefully that continues to get refined down as more estimates come in. So I periodically get messaged with updates. So I'll keep you praised. Lexi Shade, thank you for the $5. Says, I live out of my car, so I couldn't donate much, but how would someone like me get access to maps like this, as I'm interested in science and space? So a really good place to go is actually to Heavens Above. So heavens-above.com. You can actually put in your latitude and longitude, and it will actually update you when certain satellites are going overhead, when the space station is going up overhead. You can actually look up this particular object and see if it's going to pass over you. And you can go and check it out. So appreciate the $5. Gazanar Gori, thank you very much. Gazanfar Gori, thank you very much for the $10 and the #1 fan emote there. That's awesome. We appreciate your support. One-Rupted, thank you for the $5. Says, yo, WSG is Texas gonna go boom, shakalaka, because I hope so. Well, hopefully it doesn't go boom. These pieces, will break up and slow down high up in the upper atmosphere. And really, the only threat is from metal pieces kind of raining down, right, in different areas. And so the only impact is actually where those pieces land. You step a foot to the left, a foot to the right, and everything's fine. They're not explosive when they hit the ground. So it's also looking like North America is unlikely at this point to see a reentry, just due to the fact that the reentry estimated time is now under an hour. And in order to make it back to North America, in particular kind of the Texas area, would be something like 5 in the morning. So Texas is looking pretty safe at this point. Avaram Green Hut, thank you for the $10. What if it were to hit a fault line, nuclear facility? Any chance it takes out Congress? Thanks for the commentary. Well, I think if it hit the fault line, there's not enough mass to cause any problems. If it hit the nuclear facility, they usually have a lot of backup systems, so I think we'd be okay with that. It would be unlikely to cause damage. I know that these domes of nuclear facilities, containment domes, are actually even designed to withstand an aircraft impact, almost kind of withstand a 9/11 style impact. So the mass of this object, especially once it's broken up into many pieces, will not be enough to actually penetrate the containment dome. So nuclear facilities would be okay. Congress depends on your political interests, I suppose, but if you've got a solid roof over you, you're probably good to go. Thanks for the commentary and thanks for the $10. Connie Philip Pelly, thank you very much for the donation. Appreciate it. Morgan Westerman, thank you for the $5. Says, I just wanted to thank you for the live stream. I've been watching you for hours. You helped me realize the reality of this impact. It's not Armageddon. Yes, and that's the one thing I just really want to emphasize is that it really isn't Armageddon. It's an interesting event. It's potentially a fantastic light show. If you happen to see it, it probably would be extremely beautiful. But yeah, it's nothing to freak out about or worry about too much. It's just an interesting thing in this universe that we live in that's going on right now. Eric here, Sanford, thank you for the $5. How is the altitude increasing? And the answer is that this is in a elliptical orbit. All orbits are ellipses. You have a high point to the orbit called the apoapsis and a low point to the orbit called the periapsis. And at any given time, it takes roughly 90 minutes to orbit the Earth. You're going between a high point of that orbit and a low point of that orbit. So you're seeing periodic changes in altitudes going up and going down and going up and going down in a cyclical fashion as the object orbits the Earth. So totally normal. As it climbs out towards the high point of the orbit, the altitude increases, and then as it goes down to the low point of the orbit, it decreases. So kind of normal effect. So taking a look at the ground track here, it has now kind of cleared New Zealand. It's now really headed out to a very barren area of the southern Pacific Ocean. So we're going to keep an eye on this thing, especially as it kind of approaches the next kind of land area. But again, low risk. 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by ocean. That's the most likely endpoint for this thing. If it does land on land, less than 1% chance it hits any human whatsoever. And then the odds that it hits you is like 1 in 8 billion. So very low chance of it having any kind of bad outcome. But we'll keep an eye on this for you here. And in the meantime, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If you want them to go to the front of the line, go to the super chat. And we'll just keep keeping an eye on this all together. So one thing, I do have a little bit of an update. One of my colleagues here saying a bit of a stat that is helpful. Its current track is 90% over the ocean. So again, looking really good for a non-human, kind of outcome to this thing. So most likely at this point, looking like could be an ocean landing. So we'll hope for that. Somebody asking if it causes damage, will the Chinese government be responsible? There are treaties in place between spacefaring nations, so that if there is damage or injury caused by another nation's sort of space activities, there is a process basically for compensating any victims if there was to be some kind of bad outcome to this. But odds of that are incredibly low. So it's really good news. So just seeing what other questions you guys have. So current estimate is saying about 46 minutes away from potential reentry, the middle of the reentry, period. At this point, I would say this thing could reenter almost at any moment, but it also could reenter, after this time period. I think the plus or minus estimate right now is about an hour. So it certainly wouldn't be it certainly is possible it could go, it could go later. So we're continuing to monitor the situation. Clarky's Weather and Stuff, thank you so much for the chat. Asking, will it pass over Australia again, or are we now in the clear? I do believe there may be another pass. There. I can't see further out right now on the ground track, but I do think it's possible it could pass over a different part of Australia. So certainly it's a possibility. Roroanoa Zoro, thank you for the donation. How much money I will receive from China if the rocket destroys my house? Salute from Brazil. Hopefully lots, right? But hopefully it doesn't destroy your house, and it's a hypothetical question only. But I think the odds that it hits your house is like sort of like winning the lottery. I think pretty low odds. Samir Singh, thank you for the donation. Says, appreciate what you do for us space enthusiasts. We'll bring back the debate on the safety of space tourism, we reckon. Yeah, so possibly. Obviously the more flights you have, the more rockets are going up and down. But as long as you safely and in a controlled way deorbit the upper stage, then it's not really a problem. And as we move more towards rockets like Starship that are completely reusable, we won't be leaving any debris at all. The super heavy booster will fly back and land in Texas. The Starship itself is fully reusable. So in that situation, we're not dumping anything. We're just taking everything back up and back down out of orbit with us every time we go up and down. So I think in the long run, this sort of situation doesn't have to be long term. Masha Shah Hiroki, thank you for the $5. Could it have crashed in the ocean, and we're just waiting to find out? How long would it take to find out it crashed if it did? Hoping it's in the ocean. Yes, it's possible. It could re-enter in any moment. And if it does, when we would find out about it is during the space surveillance radar update. The object would be gone. So that's how we would find out about it. David Murphy, thanks for the $10. Murph in Windermere, Florida, would like to know how the rocket will be tracked if it lands in the ocean. Well, the answer is it will not show up on the next radar update. So that's how we would know about it. Max Humphreys, thanks for the $5 Canadian. I'm just waiting for the altitude to inexplicably start going down, and that's when we will know it's reentering. So we may not see that immediately. This system is updated based on the latest orbital elements. It comes in periodically from the space surveillance radar. It goes through a company that actually does processing on it to try to determine the orbital elements from it and the ground track. So we may not know immediately, but we will know when it disappears off this space surveillance radar. One Erupted says, yo, you ignore me, it will, okay. A little bit of trolling going on there. Godless Blessings, $5, thank you, says, good. Just put up my badminton net. Woo, my fingers are crossed to catch a piece of it here in Southern Oregon. Yeah, does not look like it will re-enter in the United States, but you never know. If the estimate ends up being far off, it could if it ends up being several hours late. Elo Ducky, thanks for the $10. Says, hi again. Based off past accidents, do you think this will change future launches? How does it work per country? If that can be explained briefly here, I'm sure that's complicated. So, yeah, it is best practice in the aerospace industry to deorbit your upper stages in a controlled way so they go into the ocean. And most countries do it. The European Space Agency does it, NASA does it, SpaceX does it, United Launch Alliance does it, JAXA, which is the Japanese aerospace group, does it. So it's definitely the smart thing to do. And thank you for all the super chats. I apologize, I can only see 4 at a time, so if I miss one of your questions, I'm so sorry. Jean LaCroix says, at what altitude does it start to decelerate? So it's not exactly at a specific altitude. It already is decelerating. It's in the outer atmosphere. It is slowing down as we speak. There's a sudden increase in drag that occurs, at a certain point, kind of around the Kármán line, which is roughly, I think it's like 50 miles or so in altitude. Daily Capture, thank you for the donation. Will it crash in India? It's possible. The last ground track took it over part of India. It's possible this next orbit, may take it over India again. It's not ruled out, but we don't know yet. It just really depends on the time at which it comes down. Maddie Gaga, thanks once again. Final one from me, LOL. How could we just mop it up? How could we just mop up from existing space junk, like a beach cleanup? It would be nice to see that. Good night, peace out, bro. Well, thank you for all the donations over the past couple hours, Maddie. Really, really appreciate it. Yeah, it's a challenging issue. Space debris is tough. There's been some talk about how you could possibly use lasers to kind of, if you have very powerful ground-based lasers, shine it in the direction the object is traveling, heat up that side of the space debris, cause outgassing, and use that sort of outgassing as creating some mild thrust that could sort of bring some of these objects in sooner. But it's tough, especially in this case where you have this object which is like 22 or 23 tons. You would need a really, really powerful laser to, make an appreciable impact on the speed it's moving at. So it's a tough it's a tough thing. Perhaps someday we'll see Starship, kind of go and grab some of these things out of different orbits and collect them all inside of a big cargo canister and deorbit them. If the money was there to do it, it certainly would be an interesting thing to see and a good thing for the safety of astronauts. Aylin 2PO2, thank you for the donation. When is the crash? How much time? So this is an estimated time till reentry. So we don't know if it's going to come down exactly in 40 minutes from now. We don't know if it's going to come down a little sooner. It could be reentering already, or whether it's going to come down later. An hour after, right? There's a certain amount of uncertainty, and we don't know yet exactly the exact moment it's going to come down. But we're keeping an eye on it. I've got a colleague now who's keeping an eye on the latest updates, sending them to me as they pop up. So thank you very much for that, chat. So yeah, latest update. it is currently over the southern Pacific Ocean once again. The next orbit, the next area we'll see land will actually be kind of really southern Central America, so kind of right between North America and South America. And so we're continuing to monitor the situation, the latest updates from the radar. We're hoping to get another one, fairly soon. And we'll continue to update the estimated time until reentry until we have knowledge that it reenters. And we may not know exactly until we start seeing either videos from the ground, from people filming the fireballs coming in, or whether we see it disappear off one of the space surveillance radars and all of a sudden it's just missing. That will be confirmation that reentry has occurred. So somebody asking what the red dots are. These are ground observation stations. So these have nothing to do with where it's going to land. These are just kind of people that are keeping an eye out for it. So lots of questions in the chat, just kind of generally about safety. For the most part, the odds are very, very high that this thing is going to land in ocean at this point. The odds that it lands on land are very low. And even if they do land on land, very, very low chance that it actually, lands in a place where it's going to actually hit somebody. And you think about it, even if you live in wherever you live, and you have a backyard, and there's space between houses, and there's roads, there's lots of space where people aren't at. And even if pieces land on your house, well, odds are, if they're small enough, they won't even penetrate the roof, and only the very largest pieces could actually potentially be a hazard. But the odds that they actually land on somebody, very, very low, and that's a great thing. But certainly nothing to be too concerned about. Everything's going to be fine. Far higher risk of getting hit by lightning or getting in a car accident or getting run over, or, one of the more modern hazards of living. So nothing to be concerned about. Somebody asked, why don't they just land it in the ocean? And that is actually what is typically done, is that space agencies will fire their engines so that you have a controlled reentry over the ocean as opposed to this uncontrolled situation where it could land wherever. BLXRZY, thank you for the chat, the super chat. If it lands on land, how big will the damage be? So the damage would be very small. It's literally like dropping pieces of metal out of an airplane. You don't want to get hit by one, obviously, but you move an inch or two away from where the piece landed and there's no impact whatsoever. So these aren't coming down like explosive missiles from Armageddon or something. These are literally just pieces that fall. They hit a terminal velocity between 100 and 200 miles an hour typically, and land. So you don't want to get hit by one, but it's not gonna, it's not gonna create a crater or send shrapnel out or anything like that. It's very it's much more chill, if you will. So a couple of people asking about North America. It does seem that it will be deorbited before it reaches North America again. If for some reason it stays in space longer, the estimates end up being kind of off. It would have to be in space for several more hours, which would really be unlikely, until the early morning hours where the ground tracks would actually go over the United States or go over North America. So somebody asking, is the FAA grounding all passenger flights? No. As of right now, there's no plan to do that whatsoever. And the odds are it won't even pass over the United States. Again, this thing is on its way out. Somebody asking, will it make a noticeable bang once landed? So obviously the big metal pieces could make a bang as they hit the ground, right? A thud, I think, is probably a better way of describing it. And thank you, Clark Seas Weather and Stuff, for the donation too. Now, what would occur is if you see these pieces re-entering, you see a bunch of just train of fireballs, and as this object re-enters. But once it gets low enough into what's called dark flight, where it's no longer glowing and it's slowed down to more of a terminal velocity, there's this period where it's still going supersonic. So it's like you go from this hypersonic where it's glowing like crazy to the supersonic regimen where it's cool, but it's still moving pretty fast to this terminal velocity where it's like 100 or 200 miles an hour. But while it's moving supersonically, you can actually potentially generate sonic booms. So those sonic booms would sound like, thunder or sharp bangs. So if this does re-enter close to where you are, and you see a bunch of fireballs, and don't be surprised if you don't hit a bang or two. PokeJohn Breaks, thank you very much for the $5. Says, I love your voice. You should do a podcast. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's always fun to talk about science and technology and engineering and space. These are topics I really love, and it's just fun to do. Kind of educate people about some of this stuff too. It's always fun. So, as you can see on the ground track, it is continuing to move over the Pacific Ocean, now kind of approaching the sort of Panama region, would be the next kind of crossing over on the ground. And really, re-entry could occur at any time. There's enough uncertainty in these estimates that, I wouldn't be surprised if if re-entry is occurring as we speak. It also could occur right on the money, the estimate, but also could occur, an hour after or so. Also wouldn't be surprising. And, these are challenging calculations that these companies are doing to determine the estimated time for reentry. You have this object that is rotating end over end at about 12 times every minute. And even in the recent footage, you can actually see that. You can see it get dim and get bright and get dim and get bright. And that is from that tumbling, as you get different amounts of light reflecting, and this thing is tumbling. So because of that, the drag is doing the same thing. It goes from high to low to high to low to high to low. So you have all these effects that are going on. And thank you, Aylin, once again, to PO2 for the donation. Trying to see them as they come in. The chat's going pretty quick, so just trying to pull out questions as I see them here. I do apologize if for any reason I miss anybody's. Somebody asking for when it re-enters, how long does it take to get to the ground? Anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes, depending on basically what's called the ballistic coefficient, or basically the ratio of mass to atmospheric drag for the object, which varies based on different pieces, because this thing will hit. It's basically a cylinder. It's about 100 feet tall, about 16 feet across. Aerodynamic forces will destroy it into many other pieces, and those pieces then, depending on their mass, will basically land at different times. Tegan Nance, thank you for the $2. Is it going to hit Charlotte? Does not appear like it's going to make it all the way back. It's going to stay in orbit that long, but we'll see. That these are only estimates from different companies based on the recent data. They can be wrong. Bumblebee, thank you for the $10. Were you on Married at First Sight? So no, I am single. Thank you. Sandria Lacewell, $4.99. Thank you for that. Will it hit Korea, and how bad will it affect the Earth? So it's not going to affect the Earth really at all. It's going to be about the same as if you took an airplane up and you had either a small airplane crash or you pulled out some metal pieces and started chunking them out the door. So it's not going to be this cataclysm. You obviously don't want to get hit by one of these pieces, but it's not going to create any kind of effect on the Earth. Black hole sun,